our guest today doesn't really need an introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. He's the long-term Dallas Morning News columnist and sports writer. He's also a TV and radio personality. Tim grew up I think, if I remember correctly, Tim and Pat went to Richardson High School. And okay, there you go, an Eagle. And in any event, he attended the University of Texas and joined the Dallas Morning News in 1989 as a sports writer. That's hard to imagine that was 31 years ago. He's been the lead sports columnist at the Dallas Morning News since 1998. And he has been, prior to his assuming the columnist role, he has been a beat writer for the Cowboys, the Stars, and the Rangers. He's only missing the Mavericks from having the Dallas quad. So prior to joining the Dallas Morning News, he also covered the Oklahoma Sooners and Marcus Dupree for One Shining Moment.
There you go.
And that was for the Daily Oklahoman. And then he also covered the San Francisco Giants for the San Jose Mercury News. Today, not only is Tim regarded as one of the top sports columnists in the country, he's also a regular panelist on the ESPN sports talk show Around the Horn. And currently he co-hosts the Dennis and Cowlishaw radio show on Dallas radio station KESN. So welcome, Tim. Welcome to the North Dallas Chambers Remote Learning Series. This is Tim Cowlishaw. We're so fortunate to have you here today. So by virtue of the fact that I gave the introduction, I get to ask the first couple of questions. So the first question, Tim, with all of the postponements and cancellations that have occurred in the sports world as a result of the physical distancing restrictions that are in place, what is it that you are missing the most or will miss the most?
That's a great question. You know, if you think about it, normally this week I'd be writing about, and you'd all be talking about and watching the first round of the Mavericks playoffs because they were headed there. The first round of the Stars playoffs. The Masters was last Sunday. The Rangers are playing the Yankees at home right now. Gary might be interested in that. I'm not sure if he has all the New York allegiances. They would have played, I think the Rangers would have played 17 games by now. I mean, and the draft would be big, and the draft is huge next week, but it would be a little bit secondary to some of these things going on. Instead, all we have is the draft, and we talk about the draft every day. I love the Masters, so I definitely missed that event. But I love the opening of baseball season too. It's really hard. I miss, I guess, the chaos of almost not knowing what to watch with, if you've got NBA playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, and baseball going on every night. I mean, you're flipping through the channels and trying to, keep up with everything. And I think April is as good a sports month probably as October, when you got college football, NFL football, the World Series, basketball's just starting up, hockey's just starting up. So yeah, I think I missed just the tremendous variety we usually have this time of year.
Yeah, certainly respect that. That's for sure. And I think that the people that are on this call probably have the same feelings. So Tim, you wrote a very poignant column last week about sports amidst the COVID epidemic, and it was something, a real thought provoker. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the theme of that column and what caused you to write that?
Was depressing the word you were looking for there? I try not to be the voice of doom, and I certainly, for many reasons, try to be as apolitical as possible. We're really not even allowed in the sports section to wander into that. So I wasn't, but it was when Trump had just spoken with all the commissioners and that conversation was going on. And there's so much optimism coming out of different things. The NFL saying they're going to do things and be on time. And at that time, the NBA and Cuban, who I think has been great in this for the most part, was talking about maybe mid-May return to basketball. And I just thought, if you keep telling fans it's right around the corner and you keep pulling the rug out from under them, that's just as depressing as being a little thoughtful about it and kind of fearing the worst and then being pleasantly surprised, being pleasantly surprised when, okay, we can actually start playing games here in June or July, and we can have fans back in September. I mean, none of us are remotely close to knowing the answer to all that, but there's a lot of voices, not just from the political arena, but from commissioners and from some different football and basketball people that, we're going to get back to business right away. Everybody wants to. Everybody wants to get back to all businesses. My best friend owns a couple restaurants. He wants to get back to business. Everyone does, and you hope for the best, but you can't just keep telling people, all right, we're gonna shut down for 2 more weeks and then we'll look at it. I understand why you do that with a lockdown, but in a sports frame of mind, okay, so maybe in May they're playing games. It's like, no, they're not gonna be playing games in May, and we got to understand that, and as I said, just hope for the best, and then when that happens, be thrilled that it's finally back.
Yes, thank you. And that was a real eye-opener for a lot of people I know. So last Friday, in these series of briefings and forums that we're doing, last Friday our guest was your boss, Mike Wilson.
Oh, okay. All right,
and
good.
And Mike and I share a real respect and love for the game of baseball, and he's the biggest Boston Red Sox fan that I know. In any event, I asked him the question, are we going to have a baseball season? And the ancillary part of that was, how will the Red Sox be positioned, if so? And we were very surprised by his response. He was highly skeptical that we'll even have a baseball season this year. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I kind of share them. And again, not trying to be the voice of doom, but just trying to think about, all right, let's think about this plan they have of playing in Arizona, having 30 teams out there, not having wives and kids there, not having people who can get infected or bring infections from outside elements, basically quarantining. As I said, they'd have to have expanded rosters because there's not going to be any minor league baseball going on. You can't just call your pitcher. Baseball is just riddled with injuries and guys going on the 10-day disabled list. Who are you going to get to replace them? So you got to expand the rosters. Let's just be conservative and say 30 players, but it would probably be more than that. And then the manager, and then the coaches, and then the GMs, and then the PR people. And then the only reason for doing this without fans is to get your games on ESPN and on Fox and on all the local channels, and even a scaled down version. I talked to Tom Grieve about this last week. Even a scaled down version of a Rangers telecast probably requires at least 30 people to be at it. If you think about the cameramen, all the people, again, I'm Mr. Technology. I don't know what they're doing. There's a bunch of cords. There's a bunch of stuff going on. You got a trailer with a director and hitting a lot of buttons. You got the broadcasters. You got the people helping the broadcasters. So if you've got 80 to 100 people per team, that's 3,000 people you're going to quarantine in Arizona and try to keep, not from testing positive. It's just, I'd love for there to be games. I think games would be very weird without fans. I think as much as we love sports, I think the fan experience, even when we're at home, I think the fan experience is huge. And I think a lot of people are downplaying that now just because they miss the game so much. But I can't imagine how you can do something of that scale for 4 months and take up a bunch of hotels in Arizona and quarantine 3,000 people and think that's a reasonable way to work. It's just, maybe it can, and maybe the NBA could do something like that. I just see one small disaster after another.
Yeah. Okay. So before I turn it over to Jeff for some questions from Jeff Kittner, I wanted to acknowledge Pat Cowlishaw. Pat's joining us from Colorado, it looks like. Norway. Oh, boy, you've come a long way for this one. There you go. Thank you, Pat. Thanks for joining us. We had already acknowledged you once. We thought we would at least acknowledge you again. Past board chair, Pat Cowlishaw of the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, and also with the law firm Jackson Walker. And
He
Pat
just lost Norway.
Yeah, he lost Norway. He's back to real life. So thanks, Pat, for all you do. We appreciate it. By the way, since I'm acknowledging past board chairs, I thought I would also acknowledge Bill Siegel with the law firm of Coles and Thompson. Bill, thank you for joining us as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff. We already have a couple of questions that are coming up on our chat function. I can ask those myself, but Jeff, you had some questions that you wanted to ask Tim as well. So please go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ken. And I apologize. I got booted from the Zoom. So if you asked one or several of these questions.
Quite all right. No, we just had a couple so far.
Tim, one question for you. And, Ken asked about when we'll be returning to sports, but do you anticipate that we might see some individual sports like golf or tennis come back sooner than some of the team sports?
I would think so. I think tennis certainly is doable, although we already know it won't be Wimbledon. The U.S. Open is still saying they're hoping to play in September. Again, that's something of a massive scale of people, and I don't know if it would be a scaled down version or what. Golf, I saw this morning that the PGA Tour is hoping to return with Colonial without fans in June, which is interesting. It's starting to get a little hotter in Fort Worth in June, but it's not ridiculous yet. And I think golf without fans, even though everything would be different, that would be much less than, college football without fans. You can't imagine watching a sport like that in an empty arena. But you watch golf holes all the time. Even at the Masters, there's 2 or 3 different greens where there's no fans behind it, like the 12th hole at Amen Corner there. And so you're kind of used to just watching the golf and the golfers and hearing them talk. And I think if they're mic'd up and they're a little more open about that could actually be a decent production. It's the team sports just involving hundreds and then thousands of people that I don't get how they're going to try to put that together. But I do think those two, I guess we lost UFC, and I am not a UFC fan, but I know Dana White was planning to buy an island and do his matches on an island, which was an interesting concept, but apparently that's been shut down. So it won't be UFC, but maybe golf or tennis.
Hey, Jeff, to stay on that theme, let me just throw in another question. Tim, talk to us a little bit about the news emanating out of the PGA yesterday regarding the Byron Nelson.
Oh, yeah. They're going to play starting next year at TPC Craig Ranch in McKinney. I played there one time. I played with Mark Crawford when he was the Stars coach and Stu Barnes and another guy from the PR department. And as many courses, as is the case with many courses, I found it quite challenging. So I think it's a good test of golf. I certainly wasn't playing for the back tees. There's this assumption that with the PGA building its headquarters in Frisco, and they're going to build 2 courses there, that the Byron Nelson automatically goes to there. I don't think it's that simple. And I think it's good that you at least know, if you're a fan, you kind of think, okay, I'm going to get to know the Craig Ranch course and I'll see it for at least 5 years. I think that's better than having a 1 or 2 year deal, which Trinity Forest turned out to be 2 years. They were expecting longer. You don't want to just be hopping from course to course. So even though McKinney is a hike for me, I realize some people do live that direction, and a lot of golfers. And so I think that's probably a good sign for the tournament.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Jeff, back to you. Sorry.
Sure. And Tim, you also mentioned college football and the challenges with getting fans into stadiums, what we might do there. Do you think we're going to start NFL and college football on time?
I don't see how you start college football on time. Let me take that one first. This could be a time where the NCAA's determination legally to call their players student athletes and to determine not to give them their own likenesses and to let them profit from them, which is why they call them student athletes. If they're students and your students aren't on campus, how the hell are the 100 players and coaches and trainers going to be out there practicing on campus and playing games even with no fans? They can't do that if they're students. Now, maybe all colleges will be back open. Most of them are closed for the summer. Maybe all of them are going to be open in August or September for the fall. There's no way to know that right now. That seems a little ambitious for places like Texas or Ohio State or any. I mean, whether you have 50,000 or 20,000 students, it doesn't really matter. To go from shut down to completely wide open again, I can't imagine that. So, yeah, I am fearful for college football. And that's going to have a huge impact, not just on college athletic departments, but on colleges. And colleges are feeling it in other ways with what's happened with students and the uncertainty. The NFL, go ahead.
So you didn't agree with what Mike Gundy said?
Yeah, Mike Gundy, let's get them out here. They're 19, 20 years old. They can get the virus and beat it. Yeah, he wants to get his $5 million salary going as fast as possible. That was a little rough. And even Nick Saban said he was complaining about the loss of spring practice, saying we need those 14 practices that we lost in front of fall practice. So they would be practicing around the end of July. And I was saying, campus is closed. Where are you going to practice? And how are you going to justify those players being out in the heat? And students, it's unsafe for them, if you're not a football player, to sit in a classroom. So, yeah, there's a lot of tone-deaf coaches out there, Dabo and all the rest. The NFL will certainly try. The NFL has the most money at stake. They got to think, and the NFL, is more. I think, it'll be very different, obviously, with no fans. But you can make it a little more of a studio sport and just a stay at home and watch it on TV sport than college football. I can't imagine college football without bands and cheerleaders and students and 90,000 fans. The NFL, there's enough cynical nature of fans, and half of them just watch it for their fantasy teams. So you could try, but as the NFL put out, what's today, Wednesday, Monday afternoon, and this was really what I wrote about in the Dak Prescott column. I wrote about much more than his party or non-party. They announced, and it's logical, that no team will be allowed to work out until all 50 states or all the states with a team are off of lockdown, they're off stay at home. And certainly the governor of California has been very outspoken about there's nothing happening around here anytime soon. Others are obviously pushing to get back faster. So if New Jersey or California, if those players can't practice, if they still have stay-at-home orders in those states, you can't practice football. You can do what we're doing. You can have meetings on Zoom, and you can, work out in your home gym. But you got to have 6 weeks of practices and some kind of training camp, something, before you can start playing games. So they need to be able to do something around the end of July to try to start on time, whether you're playing with fans or not. And I think that's, maybe things are going to go well enough that'll happen, but I think that's pretty ambitious.
Hey, Jeff, let me jump in one more time. Sorry to keep doing this, but Tim, let me push back a little bit about studio sports, because you said that the NFL might translate, but not necessarily college. But isn't college already a studio sport when you get into the secondary bowl season?
Oh, yeah, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know, are there 35 bowls now, 38? I mean, I used to do a bowl pool, but now there's too many games. I can't do them all now.
Yeah.
Yeah, by then, I just mean, it's part of what I said about the players being regarded as student athletes. You can't do something different with them than you do with your 30,000 other students. But part of it is just, I think the atmosphere, it's like the NFL Sunday morning shows are, except with a couple exceptions at the end of the year, they're studio shows with Jimmy and Terry or the ESPN people. College game day is on campus and there's 2,000 kids in the background. And that's kind of college football's atmosphere to me, whether that, whatever game is being played. And I think if you try to play college games just to get the TV revenue, which is really the only reason to play these other games, if the fans can't attend them, then I just think that's missing the boat for me. Now, yeah, the bowls, you're right on the bowls, because those are a big money grab by the NCAA,
Yeah.
and they're preposterous. But the rest of the season, I think, has a little bit of integrity to it.
Let me switch to one other question. This has nothing to do with COVID. Where do you see Luka in the comparing all great athletes a year and a half into his career? Where do you see him on the list of great athletes or great players in the Dallas sports history?
Oh, in the Dallas history, he's as high as you want to put him. I hadn't thought in those terms. I would say Emmitt Smith, 2 years into his career, you knew he was going to win. I guess he had won a rushing title. He won one in his third year, but he was awfully close. And he won a Super Bowl in his third year. I can't even think of a Ranger who got off. I mean, Pudge was really good right away. Jason Kidd was really good right away, but they let him go. I mean, I think Luka, his first 100 games, all the stats you've seen on that, it's always him and LeBron James and what they're doing at the start of their careers. He's ahead of basically everybody else. And the funny part is he's miles ahead of Dirk Nowitzki. Now, that doesn't mean he'll finish there. But Dirk's first year, I think he averaged 7 points. I know he scored 2 points in his first game at Seattle. But I think he averaged 7 or 8 points. And it was his third year before he got up around 18 to 20 points. And then it started taking off. It's remarkable. I mean, you could have, the first 2 or 3 months of the regular season, Luka was definitely in the top 3 for the MVP. As time went on, partly because he got hurt, partly because the team played a little more average after that great start, he would still have been top 8, top 10, something like that, first starting in the All-Star game. And to do that at 20, I think that was right before he turned 21. That's just unheard of, especially in the West, with so many great players who never start All-Star games. So, I mean, his career, it seems like he can be about anything he wants. And especially as he and Porzingis go along, I was going to say this isn't your question, but it sort of goes with it. Like if there's no playoffs, that's bad for the Mavericks because you wanted to get in there and you wanted to have that experience. Even if you lost in the first round, I think you gain from that. But I think it's much more damaging for a team like the Stars, which is built around an older goalie, a couple of stars who aren't old but play old, Ben and Sagan, and then the older guys they picked up last year. I mean, they were making a run for it this year. That was their idea. The Mavericks' best players are 21 and 24. Their time is 3 years from now when LeBron is retired, when Kawhi is close to being retired, when Harden and Westbrook are in their mid-30s, and Luka and Porzingis are 24 and 27. So I think Luka's career start for around here, maybe Dwayne Thomas. No, that's a bad comparison. Let's see.
Most of the people on this call wouldn't even know who Dwayne Thomas was.
The guy up there in Norway knows, and a few others, and not many. It's as brilliant or bright a start as you can hope for.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And I thought, I'll say this real quick. He won Rookie of the Year going away, and I thought, okay, he won Rookie of the Year, and he's really good. But everybody makes this point. He was much more prepared by playing these longer seasons in Europe with pros than the one and done college player who plays 28 games and comes into the pros. So I thought year 2, there's going to be a leveling off, and those second year college guys are going to come up, and it didn't go that way. Luka got better. Luka was the one who just continued to be way ahead of the rest of his class. Amazing.
What a mercurial talent.
Yeah,
amazing.
It's fun to watch.
Our favorite Baltimore Raven, Jonathan Kang, has a question for you. So, Jonathan,
Baltimore.
All right. Well, I appreciate that.
There he is.
Hi. So a quick question I had was, I've been talking with some of my friends, and some of them are thinking, man, my job's not going to be the same after this. I may never have to go back into the office or anything like that. How do you see the sports world, or where in the sports world do you see that this will have a lasting impact far beyond this year or next year?
Well, that's a great question. And just to answer your question, the reason I'm in a closet today, and I explained this to my brother and family on an Easter call. I do the radio show from home now, and having put all hardwood floors in the house or in my townhome, as we all do, hardwood floors are terrible for sound, especially if you got a window. My master closet has carpet. There's obviously no windows, so this is the best sound I can produce here. So that is why I do the shows from here, and that's why I chose to do this from here. That's a great question about, continued change. And, I think we're all aware that I've always been kind of anti-handshaking anyway. I think we're all more aware of just, is it necessary to do all this touching and grabbing and things that we used to just not even think twice about. And maybe after this is over, a year from now, we all go back to normal, but I suspect we don't completely. I'm trying to think of the jobs. I mean, you've clearly found out in the sports world, there are a lot of different things you don't have to be in a certain place to do. Everybody can do, you can be a general manager of a baseball team, and you've got scouts who have to be at games, but you don't have to be at them, and you don't have to. I mean, you can kind of do your job from a computer, or 90% of it anyway. So there are things for sure, but it is isolating, as we all know, and we've all learned. And I had to do 2 radio shows, Monday and Tuesday, because of my internet issues we discussed that I fixed last night. And it's you do miss a little going to the office. Now, maybe you don't miss it a lot, and maybe you don't want to go back to the hours you were putting in all the time in the office. But I mean, I think that's going to be a real question across the board in sports and other things. If you figured out you can be efficient from home, why exactly are we all gathering in big groups? There's a big sales department at the radio station. They do all their work on the phone or on their laptop. Why do they all have to sit in cubicles lined up with each other? And that would be the same with, the people in sales and tickets at sports things. It's going to be very interesting to see who doesn't go back, because I think there's a lot of people who probably don't need to.
Hey, Tim, one of the biggest extravaganzas in sports of all is the NFL draft.
Yes.
And that's going to be conducted out of a basement in Bronxville, New York. So that talk about potentially changing forever. Talk to us a little bit about the NFL draft.
I would like to think, I'll tell you this about Roger Goodell. I knew Roger Goodell back in the late 80s. I was the Cowboys beat writer for the Morning News. He was initially an intern. He worked in the PR office, and then he did something else PR related. And the absurd amount we used to travel to do unnecessary things back then, because newspapers had money. They had NFC East meetings in New York in the spring. And so we would fly up there and we would go to dinner at Gallagher's with Tom Landry. The coaches then were Tom Landry, Joe Gibbs, Gene Stallings in Arizona, Buddy Ryan in Philadelphia, and Parcells. And it was like an interview session, but mainly it was steaks and drinking. And then there was some other kind of meeting the next day. And I hung out with Roger Goodell, and I knew him then. And he was a funny guy. And as he ascended up the ladder, I thought, what if Roger Goodell's commissioner one day? That'd be great. He's a great guy. And like all things, when you become powerful, your personality changes a little bit. But I do know he has a sense of humor. So he's doing the picks from his basement, as you said, at his house. I wish he would either come out in pajama pants, you know, and he can wear the coat and tie, but show when he walks out, he's got pajama pants or sweatpants on. And I wish he would pipe in a little booing, just on a little speaker when he comes walking out. He's capable of doing that and having that kind of humor. As far as the teams, you know, there's a lot of nervousness about doing this from home and not having everybody in a group. They're all going to be doing what we're doing. And some of them are about as technologically savvy as me. And, you know, they're going to be on the clock trying to make a trade with another team doing that. And somebody's going to be buffering, and, you know, somebody's going to have trouble with something. So, you know, I think overall they had enough. You had an entire college season, so you got the entire college career to look at. You got the combine to look at. A lot of guys didn't do pro days, but you can live without that. There's obviously a couple players like the Alabama quarterback who might get hurt by that, and he might not. But it's going to still be it's going to be a trimmed down spectacle. It's certainly not going to be what it was supposed to be at the Bellagio with players in boats and all the rest. But you know, it could be more just about football and more about fun. And I do think Goodell has a chance to create a little humor with this if he uses it wisely.
Great. Jeff, you had some other questions?
I do, but before I ask some more, I'd like to recognize Pat Cowlishaw. Tim, I'm going to call on your brother for the next question.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Tim,
Oh, there he is. He's back in Norway.
You've expressed, and it relates here, you've expressed skepticism about studio sports and televising games without fans in different leagues, different games. I'm wondering that between what we can do, computer graphics, videography, and a little bit of the spirit of Gordon McClendon, whether we wouldn't watch a college game and you'd see the players on the field playing, and you'd see a divide between fans wearing crimson and fans wearing orange, and you'd see cheerleaders and you'd hear bands, and they cheer more or less at the appropriate times. And it may sound cheesy, but as much as we all want the sports back, people might go for it. Do you know if people are working on that? And I'll just let you respond to the idea.
Yeah, I don't know that they've gotten that far to work on that. You know, you could obviously, every game you watch, you know, if it's a national championship or whatever, they always show the visiting team, the fans back in a bar somewhere. You can do different shots of fans. The fans, if they're going to be real people, they got to be able to congregate. They got to be able to get together and do that. Otherwise, it's going to be sparsely attended.
You just pull tape from the
you just want tape.
XOU game.
Okay.
And have fans imposed on a green,
All right. So yeah. Okay. So you don't want it to be live people. You just want it to be a reminder of what we used to look like. Somebody could certainly try that. That's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought of that. Some of that might work. You show the play and then you show footage. Lord knows they have plenty of footage of Sooners fans cheering or whatever. People might chuckle at it at first and then get used to it. So I think definitely in the NFL, like I said, where there's more cynicism anyway, people will kind of buy just about anything to get the games back. Maybe that works a little bit in colleges. Announcers creating a little atmosphere for you. Could be fun. Might be all we have for a year. Might have to do that. That's kind of cool.
Thanks, Pat, for that question. Tim, I want to stick to football for another question here. Ken asked you about Luka. Let me ask you about another prominent Dallas athlete, Dak Prescott. What's going on with him with the franchise tag and this party? And is he the long-term quarterback for the Cowboys?
Well, they certainly have thought he was all along up into this process. I think they're shocked. I know they're surprised. I think they're pretty shocked that he and his agent didn't sign a deal last year and that he willingly played his fourth year for $2 million rather than take whatever the guarantee would have been, 70 or 80 million, and go ahead and long term. Everybody else does that. Wentz, Goff have already done that because they had an extra year on their contracts because they were first round picks. And I've always said, so to give Dak credit first, if players look at the reality and are willing to take the gamble, especially quarterbacks who are, other than Tony Romo, they're kind of hard to hurt anymore. You don't get to hit them. You don't get to hit them high. You don't get to hit them low. And that's why you have a lot of guys who just, Tom Brady's playing at 43 and Phillip Rivers at 40 and Breeze at 41. And they don't get hurt that much. They get hit, but they don't get hurt a lot. If you're willing to gamble on yourself a little bit and not rush to the guaranteed money and put yourself in situation to be franchised, if you're a quarterback or you're a defensive lineman, just like Kirk Cousins showed, Washington got stuck in this situation. They didn't really believe in him, and so they franchised him twice, and he made a ton of money, and then he got a ton of money from Minnesota. By playing for $2 million, Dak got to a point, all right, I know I'm getting $31 million next year. That's the worst I can do, is get franchised in that. And then if they don't come to terms with me, it'll be about $36 million the next year. So the team gets stuck because they want a lower salary cap figure. So he kind of won the battle initially. Now, I don't know, I wrote about today, is he losing a little bit of that leverage? Part of the big leverage he had was, well, they got to sign him. They got a new coach. They got to have him for mini camps and OTAs and meetings and practices. Well, they're not having any of those things. All they have is Zoom meetings till whenever training camp is. And who knows if they have training camp. So it doesn't really matter if Dak has is there or not. He can catch up on the meetings. It's wanting him out there to run the plays and get coordinated with new receivers and all the rest. That's what you want. So he's losing some leverage there. Is he the long-term guy? I mean, I've always thought, I think Dak is a very good quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback. I go back and forth on whether I'd rather have him or Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz at his best is a little better than Dak. Carson Wentz gets hurt. Dak doesn't get hurt. So you got to decide which way you want to go with that. I think he's worthy of getting his salary will go into the top 2 or 3. And people say, well, that's too much. But 2 years from now, he'll be 8th, because Mahomes will go past him and Lamar Jackson or whoever else is next. That's just, Derek Carr was once the highest paid quarterback. That's just a matter of timing and when you come up for your second contract. So I think fans get too bent out of shape over that. He does need to stop having parties or whatever he's doing and, putting his arm around Dez and Zeke and taking photos. He's sending some weird messages that are kind of out of character from him and much more in character for Zeke. that he probably needs to stop with. The short answer would be I think he's good enough to deserve it. I don't know if he's the guy that's going to win a Super Bowl for you, but there's only usually one or two of those guys that you feel like Mahomes' first year, you knew this guy is going to do this pretty soon, or he should. Most of the guys you have questions about Goff, you have questions about Garoppolo, you got questions about Wentz, but they've all been a lot closer than Dak has.
Yep.
Great. And then sticking on the subject of the NFL, can you give us a preview of the draft substantively? What do you think the Cowboys will do? And do you anticipate any surprises around the league?
Surprises around the league, the big question, at 5 or 6, Miami and the Chargers are picking. And there's a thought they both want quarterbacks. And the assumption has been that Miami will take Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama. But he's the one guy who's really hurt by teams not being able to work him out, have their trainers, doctors look at him, all the things teams usually do. They've got a little bit of video that he put out. And they have the, I guess, independent medical report that is out there. And they got to go with that. So it's a question, do they take him or do they take the guy from Oregon, Justin Herbert? Do they and the Chargers flip? I don't know that anybody will trade up to get either one. Some people think Detroit could take one of them at 3, but I don't expect that. I think Cincinnati is going to have the best offseason of any team in the NFL. They've signed 3 really good defensive starters in free agency, and they're going to get Joe Burrow. So they go from the worst team to a very interesting team. Whether that means they're 7-9 next year and on their way, who knows? But Dallas does go to Cincinnati next year. Or they at least play them. Is it there? Can't remember if it's there or here. The Cowboys, the assumption is defensive backs, and whether it's a corner or safety, maybe even in both the first 2 rounds. But I'm curious to see that there's so many good wide receivers. And some people have Oklahoma's CeeDee Lamb being available at 17. And if that were true, I don't know how you would not do that. And even though you've got Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup, you might only keep Amari Cooper 2 more years, and you could let him go if you think he's making $22 million by then, if you think that's too much. So it would be interesting to see if they went that route. I don't think anything other than defensive back makes a lot of sense. I'd be really surprised if they think there's a defensive end there, which they still seem like they need after losing Robert Quinn, but I know they have hopes for a couple other guys. So I would think whether it's the cornerback from Florida, the safety from Alabama, there's different guys being tossed around, safety from LSU. I think it'll be a surprise if they don't take at least one defensive back in the first 2 rounds, and they might do it in both.
Tim, thank you for that. We've talked about all 4 of the Dallas professional sports teams. Which of the 4 do you think will win a championship next? And then rate them in order of which you think will win first, second, third, and fourth.
People love to ask this question, and you're doing it because you got a Stars jersey on, and you know I'm going to say the Stars. Because I think winning the Stanley Cup, not that it's easy, but winning the NBA championship is the hardest. It requires usually 2 superstars, and the Mavs may end up having that. They're not there yet, but they might get there. I don't think they'll get there in the next couple of years. I think with Ben Bishop, the Stars always have a chance. And if you look at last year, Game 7, double overtime, I mean, they came as close to beating St. Louis as anybody did. And had they won that game against St. Louis, I feel fairly certain they would have beaten the Sharks and gone on to at least play the Bruins. And maybe they beat them and maybe they lose to them. But I would say Stars first, although their window is going to close the fastest. Because even though Jamie Benn might just be turning 30, he's more like a 35-year-old guy at this point. And Sagan is playing like he's an older Yeah, not bad, but just they're not top 10 scorers anymore. But I think with their age, with their experience in goal, with their defense is going to, they were leading the West in fewest goals allowed. I would go Stars. I would go Stars. I will say the Mavericks are second, but I think that's 4 years away, which would mean I don't really think the Cowboys are going to win a Super Bowl with this current core of players. Now, they could. I think the NFC is really good right now. I think there's about 10 really good teams and a couple teams that are going to become pretty good, including the Arizona Cardinals with Kyler Murray. They will get there. But just with San Francisco and Seattle and Green Bay and maybe Minnesota still and all the teams in the South except Carolina, I think the Saints and Atlanta and Tampa Bay, maybe even with Brady. I just think the NFC is so deep, it's hard to say, okay, the Cowboys are going to win one in the next 3 years. The Rangers I'm kind of leaving out. I wanted to see how they did because they have 3 good starting pitchers. They're all 32, 33 years old. But compared to the rest of the league, their top 3 is as good as anybody. And I wanted to see how that worked. I don't think their lineup is great, but in the new ballpark, pitching might be a little more of a factor. They think it will be a little bit less of a hitter's park, certainly with the roof closed. That'll happen some. But I can't really put the Rangers on the list till I see them. So I guess it's Stars, Mavs, Cowboys, Rangers.
And let's talk about the Rangers, Tim, for a little bit. What do you think about the new stadium, and how will that play out?
Okay, first of all, I thought, and I wrote and said many times, I thought the new stadium was completely unnecessary. I know it's hot. It's hot. It's really hot for about 15 games a year out of 81. There's a lot of very pleasant games, and that was such a great stadium. And especially if you're like me and you went to a lot of games in Arlington Stadium, you thought Globe Life Park was like the greatest thing ever built. I mean, my God, this is a legitimate stadium. It's not just a little minor league park they threw some bleachers on. So I hated to see that turned into the home of the Renegades, which I guess it's not that anymore either. I think the park will be very nice. It looks a lot like Minute Maid Field. It looks a lot like Houston. I think, which is nice, and it is nice when I've been to games in July in Houston once or twice, and it's nice to go to a game and know you're not just going to sweat like crazy. But roof closed baseball has a different feel than big blue sky night open air baseball. It just does, and it's not horrible, and I think people will get used to it. But I will miss the old place. I think this will be very nice. I haven't been inside of it yet, but I've seen enough pictures, and everybody's seen the pictures to know what it looks like. It's interesting that teams are going smaller and smaller, and they're figuring out more seats doesn't mean more money. A demand for tickets means money, which is why my alma mater, by the way, quick sidebar, when I was at college, UT basketball became good with Abe Lemons. And so they went from Gregory Gym, which sat about 3,000 people, to building the Superdome, the Irwin Center, which seats 16,000. And our senior year, it opened, and we thought, God, this is the greatest place ever. Now, Texas is building a 10,000 seat basketball arena because they never fill the 16,000 seat one. That has a lot to do with UT mentality and other things. But so I think the fact that this will hold 41 or 2,000, I think, instead of 49 or 50, is probably a smart thing, and it'll look good. I wish they'd keep the roof open more often, but the way these things go, and from the Cowboys games, they close the roof all the time. It's a rare day they have it open over there, even when it's nice. So I think that's unfortunate.
Thanks, Tim. Last question for me. What's your favorite Major League Baseball ballpark?
Favorite park? It's Wrigley Field, although we went to Fenway last summer and it was a perfect, I think it was June Saturday afternoon, and box seats. And I don't know if people here understand what box seats are, where there's a bar here and there's 4 of you, and there's like nobody touching you, and you're here. It's like you're in your little world there. So Fenway is close. I like Yankee Stadium, even though it's not the one me and the guy from Norway went to as children. They did as good a job as you can do. Okay, we're going to move it over here, and we're going to make it look the same, only we're going to have concourses people can walk in, and much better food, and we're not going to have a bunch of poles in front of your face. So I still like Yankee Stadium, but Wrigley to me is still going there in the summer on a Saturday afternoon. Wrigley, then Fenway, Yankee Stadium, Dodger Stadium a little, but I don't like driving to it. I like it once I'm in it. I don't like looking for my car afterwards because it's impossible to find. But yeah, now I'll say this, of the new ones, I've never been to Pittsburgh, and I would like to go to Pittsburgh because it looks great and everybody says it's great. Camden Yards in Baltimore is really good. The team is just god awful. So tickets are cheap. So you can go for about $4. And my son will go up there sometimes, even though he lives closer to Washington. But yeah, I would go Wrigley, then Fenway as 1 and 2.
And I know I said that was the last question I had.
It's all right.
I have one more follow-up. What's the best overall stadium experience for any sport that you've been to?
Let me think about that. I mean, I would think those would be high up there because I don't really think NFL stadiums are on the same level. Now, I've been to Lambeau Field a bunch of times, and that's very cool because you're driving. It's almost like, at least the way I remembered as a kid, the way we went to the Cotton Bowl, where you're driving through neighborhoods and all of a sudden there's the stadium. I know it's a little back in the fairgrounds, but it's sort of like that. But Lambeau Field, you're driving down these streets by these kind of older, modest homes, and the next thing you know, you see the lights and there's Lambeau Field, and you park and you walk in. And I've only been there once when it's really cold, so I'm not a big fan of that. But 30 or 40 or something like that, that's fine, especially in the press box where it's 72. So I would put Lambeau sort of on that level. Colleges, I've always wanted to go. I've never been to a game at LSU, and I thought I was going a couple of years ago, and the morning news, we canceled it for some reason. I've seen, obviously, a lot of games both in Austin and Norman, and Nebraska was an interesting atmosphere when they were good. When I covered Oklahoma and went to Lincoln and that place, and when they were a top team, it's Nebraska, but it was a very interesting trip. So I would put those in the top group.
Great, thanks, Tim. And I'd like to recognize Pat again. He's got one final comment to
one
close.
More.
Hey, you may know about this. I just wanted to give Major League Baseball a little bit of credit. I understand from my son-in-law, because he's one of the 10,000 players, employees, family members across the country who have participated in a voluntary COVID-19 antibody testing program that's collecting a bunch of data that's spread out across the country and hopefully going to let some people at Stanford help us figure our way into the next step forward. And apparently baseball did this not for baseball's own reasons, but because they were asked. And, it's not to advance getting the season open. It's really public health study that Stanford called on them to do, because they had a ready population spread all across the country that they didn't have to go to 50 different states and try and get public health authorities to sign on to.
So is Colin available for comment? Could I do a column on him or get him on the radio?
I bet you could.
What will he actually do? So what will they?
They've both taken tests already.
Okay.
It's an antibody test that it's a pinprick, and
Yeah.
then the way that you get a result, and it's all getting fed into a study that's going to try and tell the scientists something about, oh, here's a kind of a random population across the country, maybe skewed a little affluent, that to see how many of them actually may have had the virus and now show antibodies.
Oh, okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah. I hadn't, I'd seen the story yesterday and I didn't really read into it. And I initially thought it was more of what you said it isn't, that baseball's in such a hurry to get back there. They're testing all their employees,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to play some damn games.
Yep.
That's interesting. I will reach out to him at the very least. That's good. I like that.
Thanks, Pat. Tim, that sounds like that may be a good future column for you.
That may, they're a little thin these days. There's, especially when we get past next Thursday and the draft is over. Guessing when sports are coming back is you can only write that so many times. So yeah, may have to go that route.
Well, great. Well, thank you, Tim. Any final closing remarks you'd like to make around the horn style?
Oh, so my FaceTime at the end here. I hadn't thought about what I wanted to close with. Yeah, I told you about the why I'm doing the show in the closet here because of the nice carpeting I have. No, I would say, again, I'm not trying to be the voice of doom. I think the better approach is to be realistic about it and then find out things are a little better than the, darker forecasts said they were. I mean, sports will be back. They'll be back all the way at some point, and they'll be back partially at a soon enough point. It'll be very interesting to see what happens with, ratings and TV revenues, which drive these things, because not everybody is a hardcore sports fan. Some people watch it on a marginal basis. They're not, they're discovering all the stuff that's on Netflix right now and all their other options. So will sports lose some of those fans that found they could live without it and possibly live without the expense of cable? I don't know. That that's something they've been fighting for a while anyway, and that could be a bit of a downside. And I'm also anxious to see with what's happened to business, where advertising goes. There's this assumption that the next NFL contract, even though they already have an $8 billion deal, that it'll just be through the roof. I don't know if anybody still assumes it's going to be through the roof or if they're going to be fortunate to hold on to what they already have. So there'll be some interesting things to watch away from the playing field as this thing gets going again.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tim. We've
Sure.
enjoyed having you today. It's been a pleasure learning some of the sports updates on COVID and your thoughts on where we're going forward. As a thank you for joining us today, we'll be making a donation to the North Texas Food Bank in your honor.
Excellent.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Pat for arranging this and to our board of directors for helping us put this on. If you know folks that missed this session but would like to watch it, we are recording it and we'll make it available for viewing sometime later this week or early next week. If you've enjoyed this program, we've got a few more in our remote learning series that many of you have participated in previously, including next week on the 21st with Texas Tribune's Ross Ramsey, who will be giving us an update on federal elections and state elections in November. We've also got a presentation on the 24th with Steve Love, Trish Pearl, and Dr. Phil Huang on COVID and where we're at right now. On the 27th, we've got a Dallas Arts panel that we're co-hosting with the Mayor Star Council. And then on the 29th, we have a remote session with State Senator Nathan Johnson. So go to ndcc.org and you can see a list of all the programs. And otherwise, we are adjourned. We'll keep the line open for a couple minutes for anybody who wants to stay on and network. And otherwise, we'll see you all next week for Ross Ramsey. Thanks again to Tim and Pat.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ken.
Appreciate it.
Tim.
Thanks, Pat.
See you in Norway.